Hello, welcome back to From Soft Serve. We're back in Anor Londo because I fixed in the latest release of my graphics overhaul. I fixed like 90% of my Anor Londo issues, which was the shadow degradation at certain angles. So now I can kind of rotate the camera, and the shadows are still really cool. And you'll see the shadows over here, and they look cool. But I think the more fun thing that I wanted to show off was actually fixing all of the ridiculous light leakage issues in the cathedral. Because there were a lot in the Ornstein and Smo boss room. And that basically has to come down to a lot of different reasons. And I actually, this video I think will be kind of cool because actually I'm going to open up DSMapStudio and fly around the Anor Londo map. I've had some comments of people being like, yeah, can you show us around DSMapStudio a little bit? Peel back the curtain a little bit. And I was like, hell yeah, that sounds like fun. Super easy too. But yeah, let's head on over. As you'll see, nifty shadows. We unfortunately still have the shadow moi issue, or lines that are sort of displaying, but that I can look into later. I wanted to get the map into like a stable position. And there's another interesting issue here, is that there's those two enemies over here you can see, and then there was one over here. I deleted the one on the left temporarily, because what was happening is there's a collision right here, and you step your foot onto it, and it would then render the enemy on the left over here. And I was like, that's weird. Well, why is it rendering these two, but it's not rendering that one? And I was like, well, that's interesting. So they all have the same draw groups and display groups. So as far as like how the engine understands when to draw them and when to not, well, that's weird. And so then I was like, well, okay, let's set them to render all the time. Still didn't work. And then I was like, wait, actually you can still see it here. So if you see on the left side, I'll put my head where it happens. So watch this area very closely. As I walk forward, boom, the summit, that little online message pops up. And when I step out, whoop, 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 whoop. That's one of the weird quirks of how, oh, actually, I see it's happening with the, if you notice, the actual fence right here is popping up. Yeah, okay. So, I'll actually show you how to fix something very quickly in Anor Londo. So I actually have DSMapStudio open currently. So let's try this out. So let's Alt-Tab. And let's hope this updates. Aha, cool. All right, we're now in Anor Londo, flying around, as you can see. It's very red, but that's how DS Remastered looks in DSMapStudio for now. I do believe they've mostly fixed that. It's just not currently out. Let's turn off. Here you can choose at the top left, you can choose to show map pieces or not. You can turn off the nav mesh, which is this purple thing on the ground. I don't need those currently. You can turn off enemies. You can turn off objects, which are the doors and the fences and certain things that are basically put as objects, which are usually the dynamic things like barrels and whatnot. And then map pieces are commonly, like you can select this map piece, which it's highlighted in orange, and so it ends up being actually quite massive. That's what I found with DS Remaster versus like DS3. You could pick like one brick, and it would be a map piece, where the map piece are giant, so it does limit your ability to edit things. I'm drinking my coffee here, so there'll be slight pauses, but as we noticed, there is a slight issue, and I believe it's with this object here and this object. So when you highlight the objects that are appearing when I step over, basically the collision starts right here. And that's when it tells the game engine, okay, you need to go render these things. And they, of course, do that for performance reasons, is that this would not be rendered when you're back over here, right? And they do that, of course, because, yeah, if no one notices and you do nice little smart things like that, well, then cool, you've saved performance and no one knows. But in this case, yeah, it's actually noticeable. So the trick in DS Remastered is to actually change this to 0. You have your draw groups and your display groups. And that is where you can basically tell it to render certain things at certain times. All map pieces have different ones, and sometimes they share groups of ones. It all depends on where you are in the map. So this one has 145.018.0095. There's a bunch of reason as to why it's called that and how they generate those. But in DSR, you can basically set it to be 0. So now, that doesn't mean it will actually render it at all times. There still is like an actual like distance at play, but it essentially renders it way more often at a much greater distance. So they both share the same display group or same draw group, which makes sense. Here also, just I guess while I'm here, you'll see the light ID, fog ID, scatter ID, lens flare ID, shadow ID, depth of field ID, tone map ID, tone correct, lantern ID, which handles the player lantern, LOD param, which handles draw distance, and a lot of different things. LOD param, to be honest, actually hasn't made much of a difference. And then these are the important ones that I change a lot, is a shadow source, so the light can actually hit it and then cast a shadow, or shadow destination, where it itself will not cast a shadow, but if a shadow is coming from a larger object and hits it, a shadow can be displayed on top of it. So those are sort of your controls for that. And by default, they turned off the shadow source for most all map objects, not all. Objects had it turned on because they were dynamic, but not all turned on, admittedly. So, yeah, so we changed this over to 0 for these two here, which I believe are the issues that are happening. And so what you do is you can see on the left side here we have our maps, which we have Anor Londo, Sense Fortress, yada, yada, yada. Anor Londo is 1501. You right-click on it, you hit Save Map, and then I actually have my two folders open. And you'll see I actually have a YouTube video up that I usually watch while I'm working on stuff. And basically this is my project folder, and you have your map. I have my separate Nexus build that I basically separate and I update that on its own. But yeah, the main ones you're looking for are map and param. Ignore the MapStudio. That one I use to show what it looks like without any of my mod changes for comparison's sake. So don't worry about that. But a quick thing for me is I've made map changes, and I will now copy over the map folder to the actual game folder. That will make the actual changes. The param you can copy as well, but I haven't made any parameter changes. If you go back to DSMapStudio, the param changes are done in this menu, and you actually save those separately. So for this case, I have not actually modified those. So let's open that back up. We will copy the map folder. It will say, aha, yes. And what I'm doing here is actually copying here is the files for every single map in the game. I don't actually need to copy every one of these. I do it because it's quicker. It's just quicker to copy the whole folder, and it will overwrite what's new. That's just sort of the trick there. So anyway, I've saved it, and as you notice, I've had the game running the entire time. That is a trick I learned later, and I felt like an idiot, and I was like, oh my god. But just before we actually undo these changes, let's once again look at the issue we're having, is that, yeah, hopefully on screen that is noticeable. You can see the two gates are popping back in. So anyway, we've copied them back over. We will now quit out of the game. Your other option is dark signing. You can dark sign and it reloads the map. That's basically what you need to do. So sitting in a bonfire will not work because it's actually not reloading the map at play. But basically, if you just quit out, load back in, it works really easily. So as you'll see now, the gates no longer do that. We still have that little message on the left side that's having its own thing, but that's rendered by something else. So I don't actually fully know about that, but I'll look into that. Anyway, we've now fixed the gates. I'm actually really happy that that happened. That was kind of the perfect example to show. So anyway, let's run up in here because this is kind of our first example. Oh god, they're gonna completely clap my cheeks. No, I refuse. Oh, okay, you're walking back. God, Anor Londo looks so cool. Ah, I didn't just stop cursing. I'm bad about that, but whatever. Okay. So in here, we used to have shadows being cast and light hitting, which it was not, because this is not where the light is hitting. And so I fixed this room. This room is now correctly a little bit darker, but not too dark, right? And we come in here, and we now have the glorious, wonderful light seeping in from these windows correctly. And I've removed the baked lighting, so it's now only the dynamic shadows. So they're very sharp, and maybe not as accurate to real life, but who cares? It's a delicate balance with this mod of real life versus not, because it's Lordran, right? So who cares? You'll notice with the statues here, in an earlier version of my mod, before I released it, basically they had light hitting through this wall and hitting the statues. And that's because of the way that these buildings function, essentially, in the engine. And I'm going to show you the really goofy way that I fixed this, but I wanted to show you the actual map first and the changes. So in here, it's nice. This is the big change. Up here, there's no longer sunlight hitting through here. These windows are obviously, as you can see, not see-through. So it's meant that the sun does not hit up here. And that's like the original intent, but you wanted to maintain these shadows and the light hitting down on the bottom of the boss room. And so that presents its own issues, but let me run over here because there was another issue that I had to fix. It's all in this room mostly. That light was hitting. As you can see, Guinevere, I've not killed her. Large chest ahead, you can't kill her. And the light was hitting through here and through here. And you're wondering, why would that happen? There are walls here. But yeah, if we go back to DSMapStudio and we do our little flying through Anor Londo, which I love. I just love using DSMapStudio. It's so awesome. So you'll see Smo and Ornstein, Fat Ornstein, Small Ornstein. It's really cool to see all the different options that they have. But, so you'll see the boss room here, and you see I can highlight the actual map piece here, and you're kind of like, well, okay, well then why was the light going through these? Well, that's kind of how it functions, unfortunately. On the outside of this map piece, it was not, as you can kind of see, it's kind of see-through. And that's kind of how they did it to function. There's so many different reasons. They had a lot of dummy objects on top of regular objects, and a lot of stuff that I had to delete and modify and mess up. And the fix for this, I'm not panning the camera yet. You may have noticed something that looks weird. I came up with this idea, and it's a dumb idea, but it's so dumb that it's a little smart, if that makes sense. Because I actually had a drink when I came up with this. It's really stupid. And so what do you do when the map object is letting light through? Now you'll see as I zoom out, you'll see there's actually this giant brick wall. Well, that's weird. How is there a brick wall here when I can clearly see that light is hitting all the way through and creating those nice shadows? Well, so basically that is a map. Oh God, sorry. That is a map piece. We have it selected currently, and you can see it is not a shadow source. And so light can hit through the building and go through the windows. My first fix for fixing the light leakage was to set the shadow source to on, to set it to 1. Well, the problem with that is it blocks all light, and so then the light disappeared from the bottom level. So how do I fix that, where I keep this with the sun going through, let the sun go through, but don't have the sun go over there? Well, or in on the top level. I did something extremely stupid. Let me zoom out here. Now, I copied and flattened basically a different map piece from a different part of the map that's hidden, and you'll never see it. It's only used for some very specific function, and so that still works perfectly fine. Of course, you can duplicate a mesh and it doesn't affect everything else. I basically copied it and I stacked it on top of each other. It's as if I put them into a baler and I crushed them. So now I bet you're wondering, well, why would you do this when, as you can see right here, this is an actual playable area, of course, when you're in Anor Londo and you're heading towards ONS. Well, wouldn't this all be visible? No, I thought of that. Thankfully, with the way that from what I mentioned earlier about draw groups and display groups. So you'll notice when I highlight them, I gave them the draw group of 660-62336. And why did I pick that one? Well, that is actually, I'm trying to remember exactly which one that is. I think it might be, I think it's that, no, not that one. I can't remember exactly which one I chose, but essentially, I chose the map piece. I chose a map piece that had to be rendered in here. So basically, I only wanted it to be visible. Those map pieces that I crushed in a baler, I only wanted them to be rendered by the engine when you're in this room, essentially. So you go into the boss room, you hit the collision, it should render those on the outside, and then block the light up here and make everything look correct. But once you're out here or into some other area, it will then not render them. And so that's the similar situation with up here. When you're running around with your character, these will not be rendered by the game engine. And so it's a really wonky solution, but it works. And it just looks so outrageously stupid, but that's sort of the way that you have to do DSR modding, because the way that the engine functions with things being there, not being there. If you follow me on Twitter, which I do recommend that you do, it's because I post a lot of really funny work in progress stuff that basically I broke a lot of the interiors in Anor Londo, because if I float through here and I get back to the first bonfire in here, essentially I was testing out after I fixed this, and I was running through and everything looked normal, and I then entered this room and everything disappeared. It's as if I was floating in space, and I was like, oh no. And so what I did is to fix that is I had to select the interiors of Anor Londo and basically tell them, please render them all the time. They were rendering them at separate times for different reasons, depending on where your character was. It was, yeah, it's a whole thing. But yeah, you can fly through here and select all the map pieces. But yeah, I had basically pruned back. There were duplicate map pieces here. There was a whole duplicate cathedral thing, and they were using them at different times based upon where your character was at, like I said before. So I thought this is a goofy way to show you how I fixed horrendous things that were caused by my own changes. So now that we're back at our character, let's go say hi to Guinevere. Yeah, I think I'll end the video with Guinevere here. This is just a really quick one that I wanted to show just for, because I've been getting comments of people being like, hey, can you show some of like DSMapStudio? So hopefully you guys found that fun. There's so many more stories and little fixes like that I have over the time I've worked on this mod, which hasn't been that long, obviously, in the grand scheme of things. but there's so many instances where I screwed something up. I had to fix it, double work, triple work. It's whack-a-mole with Dark Souls Remastered, but I'm really happy with how it's turning out, which is why I released it, and I keep working on it. I've done a couple updates since I released it, and I'll keep making videos on it because I love this game, and it feels like a privilege to kind of work on it, if that makes sense. But yeah, if you like this video, consider liking it. Smash the like button. It does help a lot. Subscribe for almost daily videos. Not really. Sometimes there's a couple days in between, but making these videos keeps me on track and lets me chart the progress, and so it's actually like helpful for me. So that's why I make them as often as I do, is it's just something really helpful, and I enjoy making them too, you know, honestly. You guys have been so nice, and the love and support has been great. So also consider sharing it with anyone that you know that loves Dark Souls and is a nerd, because I got a little nerdy with DSMapStudio. I plan to do an actual like series of what I've learned in DSMapStudio thus far, for posterity to have that out there, because I think I could make a good tutorial. There already are tutorials out there. I need to make ones on Dark Souls 2 modding specifically, because there's not a ton of documentation about that. It's definitely the hardest one to find good videos on how to do things. They just really don't exist from what I've seen. So anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. And praise the sun. We're going to praise the sun on this Wednesday.